This is TWiT.
You know, one of the reasons that we have you on, Juan, as you know, but as people watching and listening do not, is that a couple of weeks ago, you emailed me in response to a Windows Weekly episode that had, it was episode 712, where there was a discussion about Intel's reaction to Apple's M1 processors, and kind of it merged into a few different areas, but one of the discussion points there kind of talked a little bit about gadget reviews online and kind of pointed to kind of like truth in these reviews and what the reality is when you peel back the layers behind the scenes, how it is for all these people, and we are absolutely included, when we have a device to review, how those devices come to us, what are the expectations that the places that we're doing these reviews for have on us, what are the expectations sometimes that even the people that are sending this hardware, they might even have expectations. I'm not really run into that very much, but a whole bunch of ideas and angles to this. And you said you were interested in kind of talking about this and that you had some things to say, and it really does sound like a topic that is perfect for the top of today's show. So let's talk about it. What was it about that about that discussion specifically that kind of caught your attention?
Well, it definitely spoke to a number of things that I think those of us in the tech gadget review community, and then also our audiences, have been kind of clued into recently. And there are certain expectations that a gadget review should fulfill. And there are certain conversations that I feel need to take place in our community as it pertains to more media literacy. And this is something that we're seeing kind of across YouTube. It's funny that there are other communities like cooking channels and cooking blogs that are starting to talk about very similar situations to what we talk about in the tech community. And they're starting to do these deeper dives on like content farms and this clickbaity approach to titles and thumbnails. And it just feels like this, as we kind of get out of this last year of how we've been just living our lives online, it seems like the right time to follow up on these conversations. And what really struck me, again, in Windows Weekly, I feel like we're really good at identifying certain parts of it. And then there are some areas where we're really comfortable, where we don't want to look at our own behavior, or we don't want to look at our own contributions. And I just think it's funny when you've got like the trio of folks that host Windows Weekly saying, well, now you've got a whole crop of these young kids reviewing, and they're doing things different. And I don't know that this is an age or generational issue. I think this is a much broader conversation we should be having across our whole community.
Oh my gosh!
And I will just say real quick, I watched that segment through today to get a better understanding. And I mean, I will push back and just say, like, they do acknowledge like they threw that
Mary
out.
did. Mary
and then they come back and say, well, I'm not really quite sure. And that kind of changes the direction of the conversation. I will say that, like, I have definitely heard or seen the conversation pegged in a way that's like, there's tech journalists over here, and then there's YouTube reviewers over here. And the YouTube reviewers are the real, they're the ones that, have no care in the world to follow journalistic integrity and blah, blah, blah.
Well, listen, you gotta give us a break here, because, we did go to school and all this stuff. And so we want to make it seem like our time was worth it in the trenches, so to speak. So we are, definitely projecting. We were definitely projecting a lot in the beginning. I was also a huge projector until my boss came to me and said, you need to be on YouTube. So.
But being on YouTube doesn't necessarily suddenly like remove any sort of. No, I'm just
trying to say, because of the way that the mediums have changed over the years. I mean, God, the internet has exploded so much. And so the reviewing and the journalism and the whole landscape needs to evolve to catch up with the way it is now. I think that's what, Juan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that's where the gist of what you're trying to say.
Well, and that it's a very complicated and tangled conversation. I mean, just look at what we're doing right here, where we're talking about YouTube as if it's an internet institution that is enshrined in some kind of, permanent solution. And what passes for YouTube today is very different than the YouTube from 5 years ago, which is very different from the YouTube that I started using when I first started creating content. 100%. And I think it's also on us to sort of explain our process as it relates to changes. We're constantly playing these games of trying to appease or game around algorithms. We're trying to figure out what's going to be the next popular trend in SEO. And this seems to be an escalating situation for a lot of content creators out there. And I think it enforces some concerning trends. I think it can create some really bad habits. And I think it also sets up some very toxic expectations with various pockets of communities, different pieces of audiences start to get that echo chamber effect back on their own point of view. And it makes it really difficult to broaden our conversations back out. It makes it very difficult to bring new tech fans into the fold because we're becoming increasingly these warring tribes of gatekeepers.
Yeah, I mean, you see this a lot when like one thing that they mentioned in that conversation that I know and that I recognize because I review hardware, but I'm definitely, at least for my own experience, I am not in the top tier of reviewers, let's say, if there is such a thing, right? The companies know, as I think it was Mary Jo pointed out, or maybe it was Paul, I can't remember, but one of them pointed out that the companies know the people that they are willing to put the technology into the hands of initially, like the first of the reviewers that, you might see that review hit on day one, and then you've got the second tier and whatever. And it's like they are playing a game of picking the right people, putting that into air quotes, the right people that have the more likelihood of projecting the image of their product that they hold. I don't know how much influence actually plays into that as far as like direct influence, aside from the fact that, hey, I'm a company and I've got a piece of hardware and I'm giving you first access to it. Oh, I'm a reviewer. That feels really good to get that. Like, do you think that sort of relationship changes the review approach? I know for me, like I've never been put in that situation, but I don't care if a company has sent me a phone or not. I'm going to tell you if I actually like it or if I don't. And I don't feel bad about it at all, but I'm curious to know what you think.
I have to say, I think that's been one of the more apparent changes in the sort of manufacturer and YouTube content creator, or YouTube influencer, or YouTube reviewer. Because I mean, I kind of feel like it's worth kind of separating some of those ideas apart. What I think we've seen, especially over the last couple of years, has been kind of a ratchet into YouTube's algorithm. YouTube prioritizes this hard trending topic. There's a steep drop off for your audience. Once a topic starts falling out of kind of that tentpole popularity, YouTube videos, the watch time, the views, the metrics all plummet. So we know that topics are very short lived. And so what I think companies have gotten really savvy about. Last year, I wrote an editorial that I was really proud of about how Microsoft was sort of gaming the review community. You put out a product like the Duo, the review community is so predictable that Microsoft correctly called what all of the criticisms of the Duo were going to be, what all of the shallow reviews of the Duo were going to fixate on, and they posted a first round of embargoes that you literally couldn't show the screen in your videos. They wanted you to focus on some of the highlights of the hardware, the build quality, and we talked about this on a previous one of my previous appearances. So rightfully, I think a number of people were critical of Microsoft's approach to handling the online review community. But to the same token, we're not really too analytical. We're not really too critical of the review process with Apple or Samsung. And we see a very similar trend. There's a select number of people who get the device embargo. They get to put out a first wave of very shallow feature videos, not reviews, but very shallow feature videos once the press conference goes live, once we get our Samsung Unpacked. That floods YouTube to try and cast as wide a net as possible. And then there's usually about a 2 to 3 week period before consumers can buy the devices. And just as consumers are able to buy those products, that's when your second wave of proper reviews hits. And that sort of sucks all the wind out of the sails from people who will review the product later and have to buy it with regular consumers. Once regular consumers get their hands on those products, the SEO has just fallen off a cliff. Your Samsung videos are just performing like garbage. The final word has already been made, and it's been made by people that are selected. It's made by people that are targeted by Samsung for a certain style of reviewer commentary.
But I mean, the companies, they're going after who has the first hit, who is going to be the first 3 hits on google.com when you're searching for this device, you know, plus review, plus hands-on, whatever. And the same, you know, goes for YouTube. The companies have been studying the different media, the different people who are covering this. They have, you know, binders and binders of profiles on all these folks. And so that's how they sort of decide that. I'm just sort of wondering, like, I feel like this discussion has been in the ether for quite a while, but what is the solution? Because it's frustrating, because it feels like I don't have really the power to change it. It really is up to the viewers and listeners and readers of this content to, I guess, in a sense, vote with their dollar, because when they're watching something, that's a dollar, so to speak.
Vote with their attention.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like there isn't. We're not to a point where we can discuss solutions, and I don't feel there ever will be. Marketing is always going to be an arms race. When a new trend comes out and how we can manipulate traffic on social media, that, you know, catches like wildfire. Major corporations are able to leverage those advances in marketing more readily because they have the ability to fund those changes. And then it kind of takes a little bit for consumers to catch on, and then things become, they fall out of fashion. And so right now, I feel is the right time to have those conversations about media literacy. You know, where does your content come from? When you go to YouTube, are you really seeing your list of subscribed channels, or are you seeing a very cultivated view on what YouTube wants to keep you on site to watch? Is there a reason why you feel like all of these videos are the same? What kind of data are you feeding into your social media feed? And organizations like YouTube are now starting to do business in a more Facebook-like way. We can criticize Facebook for, you've got a community and you've got, you know, thousands of followers. When you post something, Facebook doesn't enable you to reach your audience. Facebook stands in between you and your audience until certain criteria have been met, or until literally you just pay Facebook to get full access to all the people. I will say
TikTok and Instagram, by the way, are about the same. TikTok is a little more, because I feel like they're a little more reliant on just sort of the community aspect, because they have that For You page where anybody can sort of game it with the tag. But on Instagram, there was a blog post recently put out by a creator who figured out the algorithm that you have to post a certain number of times in a certain number of content to get circulated. This is all to say that the whole system is gamed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, or gameable.
And that's the thing, is that, like, it's funny because I've been quiet as I'm listening to you guys talk about this, because, like, Juan, you're 100% right, and this is what's but the thing is that this is what's gone on forever. Like, I mean, we could talk to, I'm sure we could talk to Leo, who has like a ton of perspective on this from his time in the industry, but also like talking to my friends, like talking to Patrick Norton, who worked, you know, in magazines before jumping on TV and stuff like this. You know, I remember reading, because my dad used to get InfoWorld, and I used to read PC Magazine, and I'd read Robert Cringely, and I'd read all these, like, you know, 90s, you know, kind of old school tech reporters. And the same stuff would happen where the companies, to your point, it's like swarm ball. They go to where the eyeballs are, and they go to where they can leverage it. And it reminds me of, like, you know, so I have a media degree. I don't have a specifically journalism degree, but a portion of my schooling was journalism, which has been practically useless. But anyway,
true.
But in my career, I've worked in music journalism. I've worked in, obviously, comics journalism, as well as TV and film, and now tech, right? And it's all the same. I remember when I was a music journalist, I would write a bad review of a band's record, and then I could figure out who were the good record labels, because if I gave a bad review, if they still got me on the guest list to go see that band, or if they said no. Right. If they say no, they clearly they're judging me based on my review. But if they said yes, they understand that it's my job to report on it and all that sort of stuff. Right. And that's the delineation. And what's happening is that so the companies are taking where they can get the attention and get the message they want to get out there. And that's no different than any company has done in forever. But the way the platforms are, it's moving so fast. It's like Moore's law on crack, right? Because the algorithm changes, and because all this stuff changed, and it's eroded to the point you talk about media literacy, that ship has sailed. I mean, like we're coming out of a period of the past 4 years where that has basically not only eradicated, kind of the standard levels of decency just across people and humans, but within media and media trustworthiness and stuff like that. And it's become tribal. Right. And what's going on in the political landscape.
To that token, Ron, I feel now is the right time to have that conversation, because I still have some hope for humanity. To say the ship has sailed means that we wouldn't see any effective change in any kind of policy. And I don't believe that's true, especially when we see the consumer backlash against platforms like Facebook, when we have, consumers pressuring politicians to regulate those sectors in that industry better. When we see these trends change, YouTubers are now having to jump through a lot of extra hoops for things like proper disclosure on ads, for proper disclosure of relationships between companies, how we might produce content that's aimed at children. So it's not a pie's been baked. It's what are the current trends, and what trends should we be deeming unfashionable over this next generation, over this next year of content and content creation and content delivery. And one of the things that I think is definitely sort of in the crosshairs right now is how consumers respond to social media, how consumers engage with social media, and how people who engage on these platforms are to be handled in a media landscape that is very fluid right now, especially as we start looking at sort of a renewed interest from the FCC and the FTC regarding how these platforms are to be managed. We are talking about revising the regulations of the Communications Decency Act. Section 230 kind of plays into exactly what you're talking about. And to that token, I mean, if we had kind of shrugged our shoulders with the apathy of, well, that's the game and that ship has sailed, I mean, we'd still be talking about radio stations and payola.
Well, I don't mean it that way. What I mean is that this is the same. It's the same strategy. It's the same playbook that companies have done over years. And then as it changes, the companies and the content creators are going to adapt to base what the changes are. It's ever evolving and it's never stopping. And like I guess I'm Juan, I love you, and we're both optimists, and we're both like we love this world that it can bring. But I'm also somewhat of a pragmatist, because I've got 20 plus years of working in media under my belt, and it's not like there's no. I've let the ship sailed on the idea of a utopia where the only the good kind of content rises to the top and all stuff that the amount of clickbait and the amount, I mean, I deal with it on a daily basis at my day job, like the amount of misinformation that it's hard, I try not to talk about it here, but for those who know, I work at the Walt Disney Company. I work for Marvel, and watching WandaVision roll out, and the biggest criticism of the show was the fact that bloggers and YouTubers who came up with these crazy theories and set these crazy expectations that fans then watched and read and then were disappointed when they didn't happen. Like the snake ate its own tail, right? Like there was no basis. There was no basis of fact. There was no basis of any truth, and it distracted from the actual art that was made and was presented on a weekly basis.
And so, I think what you're describing is an amazing opportunity for consumers to also revise their relationships with those outlets. And this is exactly what I think the tech community needs that sort of self-reflection on. Recently, I did a kind of a gimmicky video just talking about a Reddit meme that was posted about YouTube tech reviewers. And like when you're looking from the outside in and you get to hear directly how people are talking about our community and how they're responding to our community, you start to understand oh, we really, for all of these influencers, and they look like they've got these huge, amazing channels, we are reaching a very tiny community of smartphone enthusiasts.
Echo chamber.
And so when you're talking about something like WandaVision as sort of, a different subject, but I think there are some correlating data trends that we can look at. What this ends up meaning is all of those consumers who got real roped up into those theories and really like gave some effort to those outlets, a lot of them are going to get turned off and walk away. And we see this regularly in the smartphone community too. So it's not just a commentary on the people who are consuming this media need to understand about media literacy. It's also a conversation about content creators, influencers, and reviewers also taking a step back and looking at what is it that I'm really trying to accomplish here. Because like I said, it is so much harder to bring new people into this fold than it is to lose people. And for an industry that sells over a billion phones a year, I think 2020 we saw over 1.5 billion phones sold. If we took every single top tier YouTube channel and every viewer was a unique viewer, we would maybe be influencing 3% of the market, maybe, with a trickle down effect that could maybe spread to 10. So if we're not keeping a healthy, open, broad discussion on these products, then we're doing a disservice to our community. Our communities are getting bored and leaving, and they're not coming back.
You're getting churn. You're getting churn. Like that's the thing is that like it's a small
but it's not
number.
getting replenished.
Right. It's not getting replenished and it's not growing. Right. Yeah.